Some people start their week with coffee. Ale starts hers with ghosts, mysteries, and things that go bump in the night. Welcome to Macabre Mondays, the podcast where mysteries meet the macabre. Join Alejandra, a lifelong storyteller with a passion for the strange and spooky, as she shares chilling tales with her husband Tom, who's hearing them for the very first time. It's part marriage, part mayhem, and all mystery. Your weekly escape into haunted history, unsolved oddities, and the darker corners of life. New episodes drop every Monday, so ditch the morning blues and press play on something a little more macabre. Listen to Macabre Mondays wherever you get your podcasts.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to journey down the crooked path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
For a lot of Christians, Holy Week in 2019 is connected to the fire at Notre Dame in Paris. On April 15th, people around the world watched as flames tore through an 850-year-old cathedral, and the roof gave through after hours of burning. Fire crews kept most of the interior from being destroyed, but the sight of that roof collapsing stayed with anyone who watched it. It brought up memories of another church with the same name that burned during a Holy Week in 1885, far away from Paris, on the northern edge of the Alberta prairies. That fire, however, was deliberate, and it became a part of a strange chapter in Saskatchewan's early history. The year 1885 was a turning point for the Canadian West. That fall, the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway was driven in at Craigellachie, British Columbia, linking the Dominion of Canada with the Pacific coast. The prairies were already changing. Buffalo herds that had once covered the plains were nearly gone, and the ranchers were moving in cattle to those regions. Traders and prospectors who had spent years drifting through the Northwest Territories were settling into farming and ranching. The Blackfoot, Cree, and Assiniboine had been pushed into reservations after the Northwest Mounted Police arrived in 1874. Their lives shifted towards government-issued rations and restrictive movements. Now, not everyone accepted those changes. The Métis families who came from French Canadian and Scottish fur traders, and the Cree and Ojibwe women had already fought to protect their land once. In the late 1860s, after Canadian Confederation, Métis families living along Red River worried that the government agents would force them off the land that they had lived on for generations. Louis Riel led the Red River Rebellion, and when the Canadian government sent troops into the area, he left for Dakota Territory. His departure didn't end the tension, though, and by 1885, the Métis were facing many of the same pressures once again. They were struggling with shortages that had been building for a few years. Their families had depended on the bison, and with herds gone, they were struggling to get through each season. That spring, they sent word to Louis Riel in the United States, asking for him to come back and help them organize. Riel rode north along the Carleton Trail to Duck Lake in what is now central Saskatchewan, where many Métis families had settled after leaving the Red River region. As soon as he arrived, people across the prairies started talking about the possibilities of another uprising. About 300 kilometers northwest of Duck Lake, near the line that separates present-day Saskatchewan from Alberta, sat a settlement of Frog Lake. In 1885, it was a small place with a grist mill, a Hudson Bay Company post, and a Northwest Mounted Police barracks, a Catholic mission called Notre Dame de Bon Conseil, and the office of Indian Agent Thomas Quinn. 3 woodland Cree bands camped nearby, and they relied on Quinn for supplies and communication with the government. That spring, 2 more groups arrived at Frog Lake. One was a band of Chippewanyan Dene who had come from the northern forests. The other was a group of Plains Cree led by Chief Big Bear. He was older at this point and marked by smallpox scars and years of fighting in battles and raids, including the 1870 Battle of Belly River. Before the arrival of the Northwest Mounted Police in 1874, his life basically consisted of hunting and warfare, and those experiences had defined his role as a leader. Big Bear, he had held out longer than any of the other Plains Cree chiefs when it came to signing Treaty 6. He wanted to keep his people on the land that they had always traveled, but when the buffalo disappeared and hunger set in, he signed the treaty because he felt he had no other option. Even then, though, he didn't settle on a reserve. For nearly a decade, he and his band moved from post to post, trying to hold on to their nomadic way of life. When they reached Frog Lake in the spring of 1885, they were worn down and frustrated and dealing with food shortages and hunger. On March 30th, 1885, word reached Frog Lake about a fight that had broken out 5 days earlier near Duck Lake. Louis Riel had declared himself the head of what he called the Provincial Government of Saskatchewan on March 19th, claiming a territory that stretched across what is now Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. When a small group of Northwest Mounted Police from Fort Carleton tried to make a routine supply run to Duck Lake, Métis fighters stopped them and then sent them back with a message from Riel, demanding the fort's peaceful surrender. Superintendent Leif Kozer had no intentions of handing anything over. On March 25th, he led 95 Mounties towards Duck Lake, where 250 Métis fighters under Gabriel Dumont were already in position behind a line of log cabins near Thicket. A 35-minute firefight followed. 12 Mounties and 6 Métis were killed before Kozer and his men went back to Fort Carleton. It was Riel's first victory in what would become known as the Northwest Rebellion. So news of this battle reached the Plains Cree at Frogs Lake pretty quickly, and it stirred up tension in the camp. Big Bear was always on a hunting trip, and without him there, younger warriors began talking about joining Riel's fight. The loudest voice among them belonged to Wandering Spirit, a sub-chief with strong influence over the younger men. He blamed white settlers for the hardships the Cree were facing and believed the time had come to act. Frog Lake had 8 Mounties, and when they left for Fort Pitt at the request of local settlers, who worried that their presence might be escalating things, Wandering Spirit took that as a moment to move forward. Big Bear returned to Frog Lake on the evening of April 1st, and he learns what's been happening in his absence, but he's exhausted from traveling and he goes to rest. While he slept, Wandering Spirit grabbed his closest supporters. They painted their faces with red vermilion and yellow ochre, and then they went to the Mounties' stables and took the horses that had been left behind. On the morning of April 2nd, Wandering Spirit and the warriors who supported him went straight to the homes of Frog Lake's white residents and took their guns. They told the settlers that Riel and his fighters had come in the night and stolen the Mounties' horses, promising they would keep everyone safe. After this, they went to the Hudson Bay's company post, and they grabbed knives, bullets, and gunpowder. Most of the settlers had then been pushed towards the mission church, where Father Fairfard and Father Marchand were holding Holy Thursday Mass for the Métis and the Woodland Cree. In the middle of the service, Wandering Spirit walked into the church with a Winchester rifle in his hand. William Bestill Cameron, a 23-year-old Hudson Bay Company clerk who was there that morning, later described the scene. He wrote that Wandering Spirit wore a lynx skin war bonnet with 5 eagle feathers, and that his face was painted in red and yellow. Cameron remembered the way that the war chief moved down the aisle and how he dropped to one knee while staring towards the altar. The priest at this point ended the mass early, and the warriors began moving the settlers towards the Plains Cree camp. It's here that Wandering Spirit leaves the group, and he goes to the home of Indian agent Thomas Quinn. He told Quinn to join the others. Quinn refused. Wandering Spirit repeated the order twice, and each time, Quinn refused. Wandering Spirit raised his rifle and shot him in the head. The sound of the gunshot set off the warriors around him. One Cree fighter shot Quinn's Métis interpreter in the shoulder, and another ran up and pressed his rifle against the man's chest and fired. While all of this is happening, Chief Big Bear had been in the kitchen of the Hudson Bay Company post, and he hears the shooting, so he runs towards the chaos, shouting, "Tesqua, Tesqua," which is stop, in Cree, trying to break up what's been happening. But this has no impact on the warriors. Two more settlers, William Gilchrist and George Dill, were killed by the warriors following Wandering Spirit, and the fathers, they were also shot. William Cameron later wrote about the scene. He described dust, smoke in the air, horses running, and the Plains Cree war chants rising over everything. He remembered hearing Wandering Spirit calling out to his followers and the sound of repeated gunfire as more and more settlers were targeted.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
So among the group of settlers that's being taken towards Big Bear's camp was Teresa Gowanlock. She's the wife of miller John Gowanlock. She later described what she saw that morning. She wrote about an older man named Mr. Willscraft. He was about 75. He ran past the group and one of the Cree warriors fired at him, knocking his hat off. Willscraft turned and begged them not to shoot. Another shot was fired, and he ran towards a patch of brush before collapsing. Teresa herself stayed beside her husband after he was shot. John leaned towards her and told her to be brave. And before she could answer, another shot hit him in the back. She dropped to the ground next to him, expecting the next bullet would be for her. A Plains Cree warrior grabbed her by the arm and pulled her up, and from where she stood, she saw John Delaney killed, and his wife, who was also named Teresa, was pulled away from his body and taken prisoner. When the shooting stopped, 9 of the settler men were dead. 4 people were taken captive. This included Teresa Gowanlock, Teresa Delaney, William Cameron, and Hudson Bay's company agent James Simpson. Cameron and Simpson survived because the Woodland Cree friends had pulled them into their own camp when the violence had begun. The 2 women were kept alive because Métis interpreters, John Pritchard and Adolphus Nolan, stepped in and brought them from the warriors who had claimed them. In the days that followed, the Plains Cree gathered food taken from the Hudson Bay Company post and wine taken from the mission church. Some of the bodies were placed in empty houses or in the church cellar by local Métis who asked for permission to bury them. Others were left where they fell. One body was set against a tree with a pipe in its mouth. On Easter Sunday, Big Bear's Plain Cree burned the mission church, Notre Dame, and then set fire to the rest of the buildings at Frog Lake. Once the settlement was destroyed, they moved southeast towards Fort Pitt, bringing the captives with them and pushing the Woodland Cree to travel with them. For 2 months, the Cree War Party moved through the northern Saskatchewan with captives traveling alongside of them. Teresa Gowanlock, Teresa Delaney, and William Cameron later wrote about what they saw during that time. They described the Cree taking Fort Pitt with almost no resistance. The arguments that broke out between the Plains Cree and the Woodland Cree, and the ceremonies held in camp, including the thirst dance and the feast where dog stew was served. They also wrote about the cold nights, the lack of food, and the constant fear that wandering spirit would decide to kill them. After the fight at Loon Lake, the Plains Cree and the Woodland Cree split up. The prisoners stayed with the Woodland Cree, who kept them safe as they traveled. In mid-June, government forces reached the group and brought the captives back to the settled territory. Most of the men that were involved in the killings at Frog Lake were eventually caught, although a few of them did make it into Montana. On November 27, 1885, 6 of the men responsible for the Frog Lake's murders, along with 2 Cree and Assiniboine men from Chief Poundmaker's band, were hanged at Fort Battleford. It was the largest mass execution in Canadian history at the time. Chief Big Bear, who avoided capture for a time, later surrendered at Fort Battleford. William Cameron testified that Big Bear had not supported the violence at Frog Lake, and the court sentenced the chief to 3 years in prison, which seems a little unfair if you ask me. In October of 1955, the magazine Family Herald and the Weekly Star ran an article called Memories of Frog Lake. It was submitted by Arthur Johnson. He happened to be the nephew of Teresa Gowanlock. He said the piece came from a second memoir that his aunt had written shortly before she died in 1899. The writing matched the tone and structure of her earlier account, 2 months in the camp of Big Bear, and the events lined up with what she had already described. Canadian writer Francis Dickey later claimed that the original manuscript behind Memoirs of Frog Lake included a story Teresa had left out of her first memoir. He said she avoided mentioning it because she was worried people would mock her for it. Dickey also said that the same story appeared in the writings of Bishop Vital Justin Gardine, an oblate missionary who interviewed Cree and Métis prisoners after the rebellion. Dickey presented this as if it was absolute fact, although this claim has never really been verified. According to the manuscript, Big Bear's group slowed down after an old Cree woman began warning them that the killings at Frog Lake would bring disaster. Teresa Gowanlock wrote that her predictions unsettled the entire camp. One morning, a young warrior took the woman away with an axe in his hand, and he came back alone. Toward the end of May, after 8 weeks in captivity, Teresa and Teresa Delaney were inside a lodge when they heard shouting outside. They stepped out and saw the entire camp staring upwards. A break in the clouds showed what looked like a church shaped like the one at Frog Lake. As they watched, a figure on a white horse approached the image of the church. The rider got off the horse, raised a hand towards it, and the clouds closed again and the scene disappeared. The camp immediately exploded into reaction. People remember the old woman's warning. The women in the camp, they began to cry, and warriors even stopped eating. Arguments broke out between older leaders and the younger fighters. But no one packed up the lodges, and the camp stayed where it was. 2 days later, soldiers arrived and surrounded the area. Officers met with the leaders under the flag of truce, and the Cree surrendered. Several of the details from this account by Frances Dickey match things that Teresa had already described in her earlier memoir. In 2 months in the camp of Big Bear, she wrote that on Easter Monday, after a night of heavy storm, the Cree told her that they had seen an image in the sky. They described a church and a man on a large black horse with his arm raised, saying that he looked angry and that this meant God was angry with them for what happened at Frog Lake. Later on, Teresa Gowanlock wrote about another incident involving an elderly Cree woman who had become unstable and was believed to showing signs of being a Wendigo. The Cree said that she was under the influence of a dangerous spirit, and they executed her. William Cameron described this same event in Blood Red the Sun, giving the detailed account about how the woman was killed. It is this account, not Teresa's, that describes the woman being led away from camp and murdered by a young man with an axe. Now, this raised questions about the second manuscript. Some wondered whether Teresa's 1899 account reflected memories that were altered by illness near the end of her death, or whether she and Teresa Delaney and the members of the Cree War Party had truly seen something unusual in the sky during that summer of 1885. Frances Dickey believed Bishop Vital Justin Grandin had written down statements from Cree and Métis prisoners that supported this story, though those writings have never been located. I've given you a lot of dates and names, but the account from Frog Lake leaves us with so much more than that. It leaves us with people trying to make sense of what they lived through. Teresa Gowanlock wrote down what she remembered. William Cameron added his own pieces, and the Cree and Métis witnesses carried their version forward in the years that followed. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the fear, the confusion, the shifting memories, there are moments that no one has ever been able to fully explain. Maybe they were shaped by trauma, maybe belief, and maybe by something else entirely. What we do know is that the people who survived those weeks in 1885 held on to their stories for the rest of their lives, and that the questions they left behind are still sitting there, waiting for someone to answer them. If you want to wander a little deeper into the shadows with us, come follow along. The show lives at Canadian Creepies on Instagram. Valerie brings her unmistakable radio presence at Radio Valerie on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find me and all the crooked paths I walk at Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Come join us where the stories stay with you.